We'll be starting with the components of a data acquisition system. In the last session, I mentioned the different components of both an analog data acquisition system as well as a digital data acquisition system. More or less, the components are same. They can be they differentiate mainly in terms of the nature, being either analog devices or digital devices. You have analog recorders or digital recorders. You have digital printer, you have analog display units. So the main components, the transducers, the signal conditioners, the calibrating devices, they remain the same, more or less. Now coming to different components, we'll be studying the different components now of a data acquisition system. We will be starting with the recorders. So what will be the use of a recorder? It will simply be used for plotting and displaying. So for example, we have any waveform that needs to be plotted, for example voltage versus time plot or current versus time plot. So a recorder will be plotting these, that is, it will be plotting x versus y, as well as displaying that for us to visualize how that waveform is behaving. Now this can be a function of time, a discrete function of time, or one function being plotted against another function. So a recorder can help us visualize the behavior of a certain waveform. Our recorders here can be coupled. They can be coupled with an analog system or with a digital system. So for example, if we are taking about an analog system, we have to measure a voltage. So our system will be either it will be a digital device, and then a DAC will be used, a digital to analog converter, and that will be displayed on a certain recorder, that analog signal. Or we can simply have we can be working with the digital signal itself and plotting the digital signal only, the discrete function of time signal on a digital recorder. So it can be an analog device or it can be a digital device. So how will the systems using analog recorders look like? So here a DAC can be used to generate an analog signal, and that can be plotted and displayed on a recorder. Or we can be using directly an analog signal and plotting and displaying that on a recorder. So this here shows an analog system based recorder. Now you need to understand first of all that our sources of analog signal can be a number of sources of analog signal. It can be simply a keyboard, it can be a punch, it can be a tape, a magnetic tape, a paper tape, it can be a telecommunication device, it can be a simple signal coming from a computer. So all of these can be our sources of data. Now this particular configuration here shows an analog system that will actually plot our output as an analog function of time, and using a keyboard layout. So you have, this is an analog device. Similarly, we can have one more configuration. So this configuration here basically shows analog reception of data, but coming from a digital source. So here you will be actually having a digital recording using an analog The recorder is still an analog recorder, but what we are doing is we are recording a digital signal recording using an analog recorder. So we have magnetic tape, stereotype terminals. So all of these are basically digital devices, a calculator, a digital computer. So a number of devices can be interfaced using multiplexers extra, converted them into an analog signal using a DA device, and plotted, say for example on an oscilloscope, XY recorder, any XY recorder that can actually plot the waveform as a function of time or any other function. So you can have both configurations wherein you have an analog system, the complete analog system, measuring an analog signal. Say for example this type of system, it's an analog recorder using a keyboard layout. So we are actually this device actually converts a digital to analog system using an analog network itself. While as we are having, in the first case we are having analog signals being recorded using analog recorders. In this case we are actually having digital devices being interfaced using DACs to a recorder. So this is our second case. So in an analog recording system, you can have analog components to measure an analog signal, or you can have a series of digital components being interfaced through DACs to an analog recorder. In case of digital recorders, you directly have the measurement of digital output and record for both plotting as well as recording it, displaying it. So this here represents a digital control system, and what we have here is basically digital signals being passed through to a stepper motor. So one of the important features of digital signals is that it can work with digital with paper punch, with stepper motors, basically used in printers extra. So digital signals can be used directly for plotting and recording purposes. So one of the main advantage of a digital system is their ability to work with a printer or a punch. Now the components of a digital system will look something like this. So these are the components of a digital recording system. So number of analog devices or analog signals can be multiplexed using the multiplexer available here, and that can be fed to a digital converter, and that's here actually represented by a DVM, digital voltmeter, and this digitizer or a digital converter will basically feed the drive unit that can be basically used to drive the motor of a printer. The motor of a printer is mainly, we use stepper motors in our basic printers that are available for commercial applications, not talking about paper printing machines, newspaper printing machines. So stepper motors can run directly on digital devices, digital signals, and since they can be interfaced directly with digital control systems, they are very useful in these digital recorders. So you have analog signals being fed to a DVM through a multiplexer that actually drives the drive unit of a motor. This drive unit will basically comprise of motor extra, motor, if you have studied in power electronics, you would have studied modulation techniques. So all those things will be included within the drive system. So you will be able to there will be a rectifier, there will be a chopper, whatever type of motor you are using. So accordingly the signal will be passed on to the motor, to the drive unit, and fed to the printer eventually. Here you also have, as you know, the digital clock will be used for sending the command pulse for initiating this scanning process from the multiplexer. This here is another type of digital recording system and various components of a digital recording system. It's known as a data logger, and a data logger, as you can see, consists of number of units. It has the conditioning element, the multiplexers, the digitizers, that's actually a DVM, the drive unit, the printer, limit capacitors, linearizers, alarms, etc. So what will be a data logger? It has, and why we use a data logger is because it's important for us to store a lot of information at the same time, and logging all of that data into some database needs a much more complex and much more fine-tuned data recording system. So if you have a number of measurements, like say for example you need to measure temperature, pressure, voltage, current, extra for any system, we need to log all of this data into some, and maybe print them, maybe record them, maybe display all of them at the same time. So a data logger will be much more useful at that case. The earlier block diagram for data recording system would actually be working with few signals, but this data logger can store a lot of data, and its circuitry as such demands more complexity and more components. Also we can make sure that the system displays our outputs as their basic units. Say for example pressure will be temperature will be measured in terms of kelvins or degrees Celsius, pressure will be measured in terms of bars, extra, or similarly current as amperes, voltage as volts. Not only displaying them as calibrated form in terms of voltage, but displaying them in their true form, that's in their true units. So a data logger is beneficial in that case as well. So there are a number of components of this system. You have the conditioning equipment, the digitizer, you have the multiplexer here, you have linearizing circuit, you have the clock, you have the limit detectors, the output devices, all of these are included here. So we now have to actually study some recorders like the strip chart recorders and the magnetic tape recorders. We'll be doing that in the next session.